Obviously not good enough. Let me see.
Peter Sellers was one of the most celebrated comic actors of the 20th century, an entertainer capable of inhabiting wildly different characters at the drop of a hat. From radio comedy on the BBC to globally adored films like the Pink Panther series and Dr. Strangelove, Sellers had a knack for making people laugh. He seamlessly shifted accents, mannerisms, and personalities, earning widespread acclaim and awards in an era when the comedic arts were often seen as secondary to serious drama. Yet, for all his success, the man behind the iconic roles was restless and deeply troubled. Outwardly, he was a comedic genius, but privately he suffered from intense insecurities, mental health struggles, and a string of tumultuous relationships. At the same time, he was winning Golden Globes and Academy Award nominations. Sellers was also alienating close friends, feuding with directors, and twice telling his own children that he never wanted to see them again. His short 54 years of life were filled with brilliance and with bitterness. And perhaps that is the enduring puzzle of Peter Sellers, a man who wore so many masks in public, he seemingly forgot how to exist comfortably as himself. In this video, we'll explore the life and times of Peter Sellers, his early childhood under the bright lights of music halls, the complicated relationship with his mother, the frantic stunts he pulled to kickstart his career, his rise to world fame, and the final days leading up to his tragic, untimely death. Sellers' story is one of comedic genius intertwined with personal turmoil, a cautionary tale about the toll that success and superstardom can take, and the emotional cost of never really knowing who you are once the stage lights go out. Childhood in the spotlight. Peter Sellers was born Richard Henry Sellers on September 8, 1925, in Southsea, a seaside suburb of Portsmouth, England. His parents, Bill and Peg Sellers, were traveling variety performers who would often take the stage in theaters across Britain. In fact, his parents were so steeped in the performing life that Peter literally made his debut as a baby, carried onto the stage when he was just 2 weeks old at the King's Theatre in Southsea. From the beginning, his life was inseparable from show business. Growing up in this restless, nomadic world meant young Peter rarely enjoyed a traditional home life. His parents were always on the road, sometimes leaving him behind for weeks at a time. He would stay with relatives or in boarding houses, never truly settling, always waiting for his parents' return. His father was more easygoing and indulged Peter's whims, but his mother, Peg, took a much firmer approach, shaping his life decisions, even after he reached adulthood. This on-again, off-again family dynamic was the first sign of a life filled with instability. Yet for all its chaos, that same childhood also taught him to be resourceful, charismatic, and preternaturally comfortable in the limelight. Essential traits for the comedy star he would become. Secure, overbearing mother. If there was a single relationship that defined Peter Sellers, it was the one he had with his mother. Friends and colleagues described the mother-son bond as extremely close, even suffocating. Spike Milligan, a longtime friend and collaborator, once called the relationship unhealthy for a grown man. Peg Sellers had lost her first child, who was stillborn, and named her surviving son Peter, after the deceased baby. This hovering specter of a lost brother was woven into the fabric of Peter's upbringing, adding a layer of intensity to his mother's protectiveness. Peg never hid her ambition for her son. She believed that Peter was destined for greatness and pushed him at every turn, often through force of will or emotional manipulation. As Sellers grew into a teenager and then a young man, Peg maintained an almost constant presence in his life, managing his decisions as if he were still a child. Even as he developed crippling shyness, he remained deeply tied to her approval and influence. This all-consuming mother-son dynamic left a profound imprint on Sellers' psyche. Though he often joked about it publicly, privately he struggled with identity, self-esteem, and an underlying need to please. Many believed this intense, disorienting relationship paved the way for his later mental health issues, including bouts of paranoia, sudden outbursts of anger, and persistent insecurity. Royal Air Force and a clever ruse. During World War II, Sellers joined the Royal Air Force, though not as a pilot or a soldier on the front lines. Instead, he found himself in the RAF Entertainment Division, where he honed his performance chops and comedic timing, entertaining troops and discovering the power of caricature. Those days gave him a first-hand audience and a proving ground for his talent, a place to experiment with impressions of everyone from officers to politicians. After the war, Sellers was determined to carve out a career in show business. There was, however, one challenge: how to get himself noticed by the BBC. In a characteristically cunning move, Sellers placed a phone call to BBC producer Roy Spear, impersonating the famous radio personality Kenneth Horne. The impression was so convincing that Spear agreed to meet with him, thinking he was about to greet a fellow broadcasting legend. Instead, he discovered an audacious young man with big dreams. Impressed, Spear gave Sellers a chance, and that foot in the door would change Sellers' life forever. The Goon Show and the Seeds of Genius. Before long, Sellers was introduced to Harry Seacombe and Spike Milligan, two comedic minds with whom he had an immediate and electric creative rapport. Alongside them, he launched The Goon Show, a radio comedy that graced BBC airwaves throughout the 1950s. Its avant-garde, surreal humor broke new ground, paving the way for the absurdist British comedies that would follow, most notably Monty Python. The show was unlike anything audiences had heard before. Through ingenious sketches, bizarre sound effects, and an irreverent approach to storytelling, The Goon Show quickly built a devoted following. Sellers shone in the ensemble, testing his vocal range by playing multiple characters in each episode. This multiplicity would become a signature trait, culminating in some of his most famous film roles, where he would embody 2 or even 3 characters in a single production. However, cracks were already forming. Sellers' insecurity about his future in show business never left him, despite the show's runaway success. He worried that radio was too narrow a space, that he might never break into film stardom, and that his comedic persona would be overshadowed by the flamboyance of his co-stars. Indeed, the seeds of his later mental health struggles and interpersonal conflicts can be traced back to these early glimmers of self-doubt, combined with a burning ambition to become a household name beyond the radio airwaves. From British films to Hollywood dreams. By the late 1950s, Sellers was making a name for himself on the big screen. He starred in notable Ealing comedies such as The Lady Killers, 1955, appearing alongside his idol, Alec Guinness. The film was a classic British black comedy and a stepping stone for Sellers, showcasing his uncanny ability to blend in with an ensemble while still drawing focus. Around this time, he married Anne Howe, an Australian actress, and the pair had 2 children together. Yet the gentle persona that emerged on camera stood in stark contrast to what was happening behind closed doors. Sellers, who had already been prone to shyness and mood swings, became increasingly neglectful and sometimes cruel toward his family. Rumors swirled about his cold behavior at home, spurred on by his unwavering drive to land more prestigious roles. He began expressing doubts about ever making it in Hollywood, and these fears fueled resentment, distance, and eventually outright hostility in his personal life. In 1960, Sellers agreed to star in a film called The Million Heiress. He made no secret of the fact that one of the main appeals was getting to act opposite the Italian beauty Sophia Loren. Consumed by this infatuation, he told Anne he had fallen in love with Loren. He even woke his son in the middle of the night to ask the bewildered 6-year-old whether he should get a divorce. Such behavior underscores just how disconnected from reality Sellers' personal life had become. His marriage fell apart soon after.
I said murder? You said murder.
Enter Inspector Clouseau. While his personal life was hitting a catastrophic low, Sellers' career was about to soar to new heights. In 1963, Blake Edwards cast him as the bumbling and obliviously confident Inspector Jacques Clouseau in The Pink Panther. The film's lighthearted comedic caper style drew huge audiences, who particularly adored Sellers' perfect mix of physical comedy and deadpan line delivery. Critics lauded him as a comedic force in the vein of Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton. What made Inspector Clouseau legendary was how much Sellers shaped the character himself. Drawing on his radio background, Sellers infused Clouseau with a playful, unpredictable energy. From the over-the-top French accent to the meticulously timed pratfalls, he took an initial script outline and turned it into comedic magic. The role earned him accolades, including Golden Globe and BAFTA nominations, and catapulted him to international stardom. Yet, behind the scenes, the volatility that Sellers carried in his personal life was still present, just temporarily overshadowed by the brilliance of his performance. Dr. Strangelove and Kubrick's influence. In 1962, Stanley Kubrick tapped Sellers to star in his film adaptation of Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, marking their first collaboration. However, it was in 1964's Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, that the partnership reached its defining moment. In this dark satire, Sellers played not just one, but three different roles. The mild-mannered British group captain Lionel Mandrake, the inept American president Merkin Muffley, and the ex-Nazi nuclear scientist Dr. Strangelove. Critics were astounded by his range. Audiences roared with laughter at the comedic ingenuity. For once, Sellers showed profound respect for a director. Where he often argued or rebelled on other sets, he listened to Kubrick intently. Kubrick, in turn, gave him room to experiment, retake scenes, and sculpt comedic moments on the fly. It was an alliance of creative minds that Sellers rarely repeated elsewhere. Many of the comedic flourishes you see on screen were improvised by Sellers, a testament to both Kubrick's latitude and Sellers' remarkable improvisational skill. Nevertheless, the unshakable insecurities persisted. Sellers was a man who thrived on adoration but clashed with authority when it threatened his ego. Kubrick was one of the few who could match wits with Sellers and channel that chaotic energy into cinematic gold. Superstitions, outbursts, and Britt Ekland. As Sellers' star rose, so did his eccentricities. He believed he was guided by the spirit of Dan Leno, a music hall comedian who had died decades earlier. He also developed bizarre aversions to the colors green and purple. Crew members, co-stars, and publicists had to tiptoe around these superstitions, removing any offending color in wardrobes, hotel rooms, or set decorations. Should anyone forget, Sellers was prone to violent outbursts. In 1964, he met Swedish actress Britt Ekland. They married just 10 days later, despite a 19-year age gap. Friends warned Ekland about Sellers' unpredictable temperament, but the whirlwind courtship, fueled by Sellers' intense jealousy, lavish displays of affection, and controlling nature, moved too fast to heed any red flags. Almost immediately after the wedding, Sellers insisted on dictating her wardrobe, limiting her social contacts, and even orchestrating a fake doctor's note to remove her from a film shoot so she could remain by his side. His on-set behavior also grew more erratic. While filming Kiss Me, Stupid, with director Billy Wilder, Sellers got into heated spats that slowed production. Then came a literal heartbreak. He overdosed on amyl nitrates as a sexual stimulant one night, triggering 8 consecutive heart attacks in the span of 3 hours. Though he survived, the medical scare provided only a fleeting sense of caution. Sellers' disdain for doctors, who tried to get him to address the seriousness of his heart condition, led to repeated lapses in judgment.
Peter Sellers is James Bond.
Casino Royale chaos and marital decline. By the mid-1960s, Hollywood studios were courting Sellers for major projects, culminating in the big-budget James Bond parody Casino Royale in 1967. Featuring stars like Orson Welles and Ursula Andress, the film was meant to be a spoof on the suave spy genre. Sellers, however, wanted no part of the comedic angle. Convinced he could be a genuine James Bond figure, he rewrote scenes to position himself as a heroic lead rather than a punchline. Tension spiraled. 6 directors and a handful of writers were juggled during production, but the real fireworks were between Sellers and Orson Welles. Welles allegedly referred to Sellers as an amateur, and the two refused to be in the same shot together. Sellers' volatility reached a boiling point when he punched one of the directors over a disagreement. Eventually, he stormed off the film before his parts were fully wrapped, leaving the production team to frantically patch things together. Meanwhile, his relationship with Britt Ekland was disintegrating. Their collaborative project, The Bobo, was a fiasco, plagued by constant arguments and Sellers' repeated demands that the director fire his own wife. In the midst of this tumult, Sellers' mother suffered a heart attack. Consumed with his raging personal life, he never visited her in the hospital. She passed away shortly thereafter, a loss that reportedly haunted Sellers for the rest of his days. Britt Ekland soon filed for divorce, exhausted and traumatized by the emotional roller coaster. New marriages and nervous breakdowns. The next phase of Sellers' life was dominated by poor career decisions and even worse romantic choices. He married a young model, Miranda Quarry, in 1970. Over 2 decades his junior, she soon discovered that life with the increasingly neurotic Sellers was hardly a dream. The marriage flamed out in 1973, and Sellers initiated a whirlwind affair with Liza Minnelli, despite the small inconvenience that both were technically engaged to other people. In a matter of days, they considered themselves engaged too, only for the relationship to fizzle almost as quickly as it began. Close friends and collaborators noticed his mental health deteriorating further. Longtime comedic partner Spike Milligan worried aloud about Sellers' possible bipolar disorder, a condition that, at the time, was less openly discussed. Sellers refused to seek professional help, instead relying on psychics, astrologers, or spiritual mediums for guidance. Even talk show appearances became an ordeal. He famously arrived at Michael Parkinson's show dressed in a Gestapo uniform, admitting he was too insecure to appear as himself. To reignite his career, Sellers returned to the familiar comedic well of the Pink Panther franchise. Sequels and spin-offs brought him renewed commercial success, but his instability on set made him a nightmare to work with. Director Blake Edwards endured frequent tantrums, yet recognized that Sellers' comedic gifts still shone, particularly when he was given space to tinker and improvise as Clouseau. In 1977, Sellers married Lynn Frederick, who was just 23 at the time, another relationship fraught with volatility and emotional abuse. According to some accounts, she experienced the brunt of Sellers' temper and paranoia more severely than any of his previous partners.
And others grow better in the shade.
One last triumph. Being There. In 1979, Peter Sellers seemed on the verge of a personal and professional renaissance with the film Being There. Directed by Hal Ashby and based on Jerzy Kosinski's novel, the movie required Sellers to play Chance, a simple-minded gardener inadvertently thrust into high society. Sellers immersed himself so deeply in the character that he avoided socializing with co-stars or giving the press his usual comedic personas, preferring a kind of method approach he rarely adopted. The result was mesmerizing. Critics heralded Being There as one of Sellers' finest performances, a delicate blend of comedy and genuine vulnerability. He won a Golden Globe for Best Actor and received an Academy Award nomination. Rare feats for a comedic role. After a tumultuous career that saw glimpses of brilliance amid frequent chaos, this stood as a testament to his true potential when given the right material and a stable environment to explore his craft. Alas, Sellers' old habits quickly resurfaced. Still struggling with insecurities, he managed to sabotage even this moment of triumph. When his 15-year-old daughter, Victoria, joked that he looked like a fat old man in Being There, Sellers erupted in anger, dousing her with a drink and demanding she leave. When his other daughter Sarah stood up for her sister, Sellers fired off a furious telegram, severing ties with her as well. These incidents highlight the tragic pattern. Even the biggest successes couldn't tame his demons for long.
I understand.
So clear there, boys? Read that.
The final days and a sudden farewell. For years, friends had urged Sellers to take his heart problems seriously. He had already suffered multiple attacks, including the terrifying incident with amyl nitrates. But Sellers, stubborn and afraid, refused to heed medical advice. Despite collapsing on set in Dublin in 1979, he continued to push himself, living in a swirl of professional commitments and personal tensions. On July 22, 1980, Sellers was staying at the Dorchester Hotel in London, anticipating a reunion dinner with his old Goon Show friends, Spike Milligan and Harry Seacombe. Tragically, he never made it to that meal. He suffered yet another massive heart attack and died a day later, on July 24th, at the age of 54. Given his history of heart issues, the news shocked few close friends, but it devastated them just the same. A singular comedic voice had been silenced, leaving behind a complicated legacy and countless unanswered questions about the man behind the many masks. Even in death, Sellers had the last laugh. One of his instructions was that Glenn Miller's "In the Mood," a song despised by his fellow goons, be played at his funeral. They honored his request, and the infamous tune rang out in the church, injecting a note of comedic irony into an otherwise somber farewell. Legacy and reflections. Peter Sellers left behind an estate worth millions, but his will was as chaotic as his personal life. In the final months, he had been considering cutting out his wife, Lynn Frederick, entirely. However, he died before the changes could be made official. As a result, Frederick inherited the bulk of his wealth, while each of Sellers' children received a mere £800. The resentment and frustration that followed only deepened the wounds of an already fraught family dynamic. Over time, many who knew Sellers have speculated that he suffered from an undiagnosed mental illness, possibly bipolar disorder, and that therapy might have eased his destructive behavior. Britt Eklund commented on her belief that Sellers was bipolar, saying his refusal to seek professional help was part of what sealed his tragic fate. Ultimately, the comedic genius who made the world laugh was rarely able to laugh at himself or find peace in his private life. And yet, the brilliance remains. From the anarchic wit of the Goon Show to Clouseau's comedic missteps and the tour de force of Dr. Strangelove, Peter Sellers stands as one of the greatest comedic performers in film history. His ability to inhabit any character convincingly, often several in the same production, remains unparalleled, a tribute to the depth and range of his talent. If the best comedy often arises from pain, then Sellers' life was a perfect illustration. A man with an extraordinary gift for bringing joy to others, even as he struggled mightily with his own inner darkness. In one of his last major appearances, on The Muppet Show in 1978, Sellers famously refused to appear as himself. When Kermit the Frog told him, "Just relax and be yourself," Sellers replied, "But that, you see, my dear Kermit, would be altogether impossible. I could never be myself. You see, there is no me. I do not exist." A brief, heartbreaking glimpse into a life spent behind countless characters, none of which were truly his own. So, what are we left with? A story of immense talent and fame, a comedic icon who shaped the landscape of modern comedy, matched by a tragic personal narrative of strained family ties, broken marriages, on-set blow-ups, and an underlying refusal to address his mental health. Like so many entertainers who battle invisible demons, Peter Sellers continues to fascinate audiences decades after his death, a testament to the complex man who once declared, "I do not exist." But in the end, perhaps his indelible body of work is proof that in every character he played, a little bit of Peter Sellers can still be found. Peter Sellers' life was a vibrant tapestry of comedic brilliance, raw ambition, and self-inflicted wounds. While he never truly conquered his personal demons, he left an unforgettable mark on entertainment that resonates to this day. Whether you first encountered him as Inspector Clouseau, Dr. Strangelove, or through The Goon Show, his comedic gifts are undeniable, and they continue to inspire new generations of performers. If you enjoyed learning about the life and legacy of Peter Sellers, give this video a like and consider subscribing for more deep dives into the history and personalities that shaped our cultural landscape. Let us know in the comments. Which Sellers role do you think best encapsulated his genius, and why? Thank you for joining us on this exploration of a man who made us all laugh, even as he wrestled with the shadows inside. We'll see you next time.